Hi, everybody. Welcome to ZealZaddy. My name's Scott. My pronouns are he, him, and welcome to Story Talk, where every picture tells a story. Tonight, we have the amazing Kimi Hughes, who is a Gold Emmy winner, not nominated, nominated and won for Decuma. She runs the Gamma Fellow program. She is a streamer, podcaster, game master, and the owner of Golden Lasso Games and Happy Jack's RPG Networks. We're going to get into a lot of things with her tonight. There's so many, I can't tell you how many questions I have because it's beyond count at this moment. If you love a particular section, hit exclamation point clip. You can type it in the chat and it'll save it as a little clip. You can save it for later or for, maybe we'll post it to socials, who knows. You can check out our own D&D supplements and our Cypher supplements on DriveThruRPG. Just look up ZealZaddy. We're everywhere at ZealZaddy except TikTok because somebody has that. They never use it, so it's ZealZaddy RPG on TikTok. You can also save a little bit of money if you use our Only Crits dice code. Let me give you that. I'm going to drop it into chat. We are an affiliate of theirs. We make a few pennies off of it. But we love their dice. I use them all the time. They're just beautiful. And let's move over to Kimi and let Kimi introduce herself, all of her cool things. And I will begin what is going to look like a tree of links dropping down in there. There are so many great links.
There's a lot of them, yeah. Hi, I'm Kimi. Like you said, I mean, you did a great intro, so there's so many things to talk about. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. We've met at conventions before, and we're mutuals all over the social media, the links that you're dropping all over. I pride myself on being a TTRPG creator from kind of a different point of view, a more feminine point of view. There's been many, many years where the TTRPG space has been like dominated by one kind of a more masculine viewpoint, just because of who was hired to make games, who was the majority of the people playing games, and how more feminine players like weren't really accepted. And it's been great. I've been in the hobby for over a decade, and just seeing the difference even in just the past decade of attending conventions, seeing how I was received way back when I was a young player, and now showing up, and just the difference of who's at the conventions, who's playing games, who's running games, who's making games. And it's just really exciting to be like part of that movement and like making it more open to more and more people as we go.
All right. I am almost done with these links. Believe it or not, I'm kind of
There's so many.
I'm going through them in much
Yeah, if
faster
you think
pace
it's
than I
bad
thought.
dropping them all, like checking them all, managing them all.
So the way it works, I have a lot of questions. If chat, you come up with any questions, you can drop them in chat. Just put question in front of it to make it a little bit easier to find, in case we have a busy night in there. I'm going to get started because I don't want to waste any time, and I want to get right to the meat of all of these things.
Yeah,
Are you ready?
I am ready. Let's do this.
Because I want your picture to tell the story. So, what do you think are your strengths and weaknesses as a GM and player?
Ooh, I'll do player first because it's much easier.
Okay.
I think as a player, I am, uh, I'm always in theater. We call it like the A clown. If you're into like commedia dell'arte and things like that, and that's like the Kermit to the Fozzie Bear. That's like the straight man character, not straight man, but you get it what I mean.
Yeah.
And so I've tried so many times to break out of that and not be like the reliable, normal, like the one who kind of like, all right, let's get everyone on the same page. And no matter what, I've got like big teacher mom energy, and I just am like the one who's like, let's all get along. That may also be kind of graded on a curve because I play with some wild people who come up with amazing creative ideas, and I'm like, no matter how weird I am, even when I like come down with it, I'm like, I have the weirdest character this time, I'm gonna do it. My friend Samantha always like tops me, just like without even trying. And it's okay, I've accepted my place. So and then as a GM, I think I think my weakness as a GM is I sometimes get too involved in just letting things happen as they're going. I'm an improv GM, which means I do very little prep. Even for, my One Ring campaign, I really love Tolkien, so most of that was made up on the fly as we go, and I love pulling the strings that everyone's giving. But sometimes I just like get so involved in like what they're doing. It's like, oh, we should probably like we should probably move on. But this conversation has just been amazing. So I don't know. I don't know if that's a weakness or just a style choice. But I sometimes need to be a little more strict with my players about moving things along.
Okay. So I'm going to ask the same question though, but now I want to put at the end of it, instead of jammer or player, as a creator, because you do all of this. And I don't think they're the same skill sets.
They're very different skill sets. My biggest challenge as a creator is absolutely my lack of time and and having too many hobbies. Uh, it is really difficult to. I'm working right now with a layout artist for my game, and she's fantastic. And it's like one of those things where I'm like, okay, 2 weeks ago I was like, I will get you the manuscript on Monday, and then my kid got an ear infection, and it's like, oh, okay. It's like one of those things that like life just happens, but then when you do too many things in life, more things happen. So when you run a podcast and stream network with 3 or 4 shows a week, when you're also trying to finish a manuscript and get it to an editor so you can get it to the layout artist, and just all these things, and prep for your Kickstarter and like all these things, there's just like too many things. So I think needing to sleep is my biggest weakness as a creator.
I think that goes with almost all creators.
Accurate.
No matter how much time they have to sleep, they don't sleep. Because we ruminate. We think about everything all night. We have families and lives and all that.
Mm-hmm.
What was your path to RPGs? How did you come to the RPG industry and community?
I was working at the Renaissance Fair, actually. I was in a band that was singing songs. I play the mandolin, and
Cool.
we were singing on the dirty stage at the Southern California Renaissance Fair. And I was writing songs, having a great time. And there were 3 or 4 of us who acts that all performed on the same show or on the same stage. So we'd rotate, and then backstage we'd hang out and just talk about stuff. And one of the other bands there, the director, his name was Stu Venable, they were talking about D&D and gaming all the time. And I actually did like video gaming first. That's what I first started in. And video games and MMORPGs. So I started getting in these conversations about role playing with them and world building, because that's something I was familiar with in a very different way. And then 4E dropped, and Stu was like, "Hey, I'm starting a game. Would you like to come play?" And I was like, "Sure, okay." So I joined his 4E game. And from there, he started a podcast, the Happy Jacks RPG podcast. And so I started being a regular host on that. And I've done that for the last 13 years. And slowly but surely I just got more and more involved, started playing other games besides D&D, started going to conventions, started meeting creators, and started streaming actual plays at one point. And then a few years ago I had this idea, because I GM'd so much, especially at conventions. I GM at conventions more than just about anywhere else. And I was wanting to do world building with my groups, but it was just like an arduous process, and I was pulling things from other things, and got this weird idea for a game. And I suddenly was like, well, maybe I'll make games now. And then, the rest is history.
It's an interesting path. I don't think it's completely unusual, but
You think most creators start playing the mandolin and then get to game design?
no, but I think a lot of them start at Renfest.
Oh, yes.
I think
Renfair, yes.
almost none of them start with the mandolin. They're way more. They're way more into the lyre and.
Yes.
So I was watching a stream of yours, a session 0 of Starscape. So I was kind of studying your GMing style.
Okay.
And this was on Happy Jack's RPG on YouTube. Everybody should go there and check it out. There's a lot of really cool games there. Do you think of yourself as a rule of cool or a rules as written GM?
I think I don't think I'm either one of those necessarily. I think I'm more a uh it's a good question. I don't have a phrase for it, but rule of cool, like I like the concept behind that, but I do think rules are important.
Okay.
Because especially now as a designer, rules really lay out what you want your game to be about. They're really the only way for a designer to enforce whatever the heart or whatever the intent or philosophy of their game is behind it. And I will argue ad nauseum about every game has a heart and a message it's sending to you.
For
Even
sure.
if even like old school crunchy games, which I've played a ton of, like GURPS and Traveler and things like that, have very clear things they're saying, even if it's not like this is the philosophy of this game in the text. Like
Yeah.
the rules tell you that. Um, so I don't like the idea of a rule of cool being like, blow off the rules and do whatever's best. I feel like I guess this is going to be I feel like I'm a field trip jam. Like I feel like when your teacher takes a class on a field trip to a museum or something, like they have a little bit of a plan. They're going to be answering questions. They're going to kind of go with like what the kids are also doing and interested in. So
Right.
it's a little bit of both. So I'm there and I'm sort of like guiding the things, but I also listening to them and seeing what they want to do. And if they want to go to the dinosaur exhibit before we go to the woolly mammoth exhibit, that's fine. That's not that big a deal. We can do that. That's a terrible. It's not very catchy. It's not as cool as rule of
I
cool.
don't know.
But
Field trip GM is a really cool term. It almost
okay,
is
cool.
good enough for a T-shirt.
Okay, yeah.
Um, really interesting, actually. I kind of like it. I like it quite a lot. So
We coined it here, you and me together.
you should make a shirt of it. Um, how many systems have you gotten to a point where you were comfortable enough with it, with the system and setting, to run on a stream?
Oof.
Because Happy Jacks has a whole lot of games.
We have a whole lot. Yeah, I haven't GM'd them all on stream.
Right.
I've done I think 4 or 5 different systems on stream. At conventions, if you put it all together, I've probably GM'd like 7 or 8 systems. I've played so many more than that, but yeah, we've got like a dozen systems on there. I've GM'd Wild Talents, the uh the uh let's see. I'm trying to think of like because like PBTA, I've done a bunch of PBTA, but I feel like that's one. That's a
Yeah.
single answer. You can't be. I've also done the One Ring. We've done the Quag system, which is quick ass gaming system. It's like a single D20 system. I've run Laser Ponies in that, which is a kids game.
Okay.
And sheesh, I feel like I've done more, but that's all I can think of right now that I've done on stream specifically. But yeah, a whole bunch of different things. I've done Lighthearted, which is a system that's sort of adjacent to PBTA that was written by a friend. And yeah, I don't know. I feel like if I sit here, it's not going to be interesting while I'm trying to like name them all off. But
So let's get into. I'm torn. Do I want to go to Decima or do I want to go to Starscape? Let's go to Decima first.
okay.
I want to work that out because I want to save a lot of time for Starscape. There's so many things to talk about there, but I want to make sure that people understand the path to Starscape.
Okay.
And this was definitely part of the path.
Oh yeah.
As a matter of fact, in your session 0, you used Decima at the end. Those questions were there.
Yes.
I didn't see cards, but I knew
Yeah.
questions were there being used. So
Yeah.
do you use Decima with all the games you stream now? Or that you play,
All the
you
ones
run?
I stream, yes. And most of my friends do too. And they have there's like a running gag on Happy Jacks because I get embarrassed when people call me a Gold Any winning designer. So literally, this is going to sound like humble bragging. I promise it's not to people who don't know me. Like, it's just weird. Like, it's a weird thing. And so now, like, they make a big point of like every time they mention Decima, they do like the little infomercial by Gold Any winning, and then I'm usually in
Which
chat
I
like,
did.
"You're fired." Yeah, that's fine. The first time you introduce me, it's fine, but like,
Yeah.
yeah, everybody on the Happy Jacks network knows me. They don't need it. It's fine. It's just to annoy me, and they do a good job of it, and I appreciate it. It's
So
infuriating and flattering at the same time.
yeah. So now that you've had time with it out in the market and in your own games, is there anything they're like, oh, I should have added this? or think, oh my God, I need to make a second deck because I have all these other questions?
You know,
Or does it just feel
I
fulfilled?
haven't had that happen. Like I thought
Okay.
I would, but I've just been really happy. I've never had that moment. Now I did play test it for a really long time. So it's a card game, and we play tested it for over 3 years because I really
Wow.
wanted to. Yeah, so I played that game hundreds of times. I also made a bunch of decks that I handed out to people to test as well. They were like Miss Cleo decks with like label maker labels on them to test it because I really wanted to make sure that all the questions really did work with any setting and any system. So we tested that game in dozens of like so many systems. Like we tried it with Traveler, we tried it with GURPS, we tried it with Power by the Apocalypse, we tried it with D&D a bunch of times. We tried it with everything you could think of. Savage Worlds a bunch of times. Oh, Savage Worlds is the other one. I've GM'd that. Because I wanted to make sure it worked. And then also the settings, because there are some questions that very much leaned towards high fantasy. So you'd have to like rewrite them or swap them out. And then sometimes that'd be something that just didn't really match if you were like, oh, we are bacterium on a slide, because people also play it as a standalone game. It's not just a
Right.
tool. So, and then the questions all worked except this one. Okay, we'll switch that one out. And then the next one, oh, we're playing Traveler in a generation ship. And this question seemed a little weird because like we didn't have a town. It was like, oh, okay, so swap it out. So we worked really, really hard at that. And I think a lot of times people are so excited about ideas, especially in the TTRPG world where you're probably not going to make money anyway. So it's like, get it out there, get people to see about it, that a lot of times they don't test things. Or that, I was lucky enough to have local conventions multiple times a year that I could go to test with strangers. And a
Yeah.
lot of people don't have access to that either. So actually really thoroughly play testing something is really difficult for a lot of people. So making sure it got really tested, I think has helped on the back end not have like that remorse.
I use Decima for all my games, and I have play tested it so far with D&D, of course,
Mhm.
Kids on Brooms,
Yeah.
Old Gods of Appalachia, which was a very
Ooh.
odd fit, but it
Yeah.
worked very well.
Oh, good. Okay. That's one I haven't tried.
Tales from the Loop and
Mhm.
Things from the Flood, which is what I'm
Mhm.
running now. And I'm going to be using it on my next one, which is going to be Invisible Sun. So, have you heard of anybody who just said, it just didn't work for this game, or oh my God, it opened things up in ways I never imagined in this game that you would not have expected it there.
Yeah. I haven't had the first. I don't know if people just aren't telling me or, I've had people say it's not their cup of tea because some people don't want to spend that much time, or there are some GMs who really like creating everything themselves, which is great too. But I've never had somebody be like, "Oh, I tried it and I wanted this to work and it didn't work." Generally, people who pick up the game already are kind of bought in on the concept,
Yeah.
which really helps. I have had people say, like, come and share. I actually have people who send me maps that they've made with their players sometimes. I get really great emails about success stories and fun things that they like GMs would never have thought of that were in there. I actually got there's two emails that really stick out the most, which honestly aren't about gaming. There's an author who's in South America somewhere. I forget. And he wrote me saying, "Hey, I don't know what an RPG is, but I bought your thing and I use it for my novels and it's really great. Thank you so much." And that was amazing. And I was like, cool, that's such a great use for that. And he uses it to kind of like flesh out his concepts and his world building when he's writing his novels. And then I actually got one like 3 months ago from a dad who was saying that um, his daughter hated writing at school and like wouldn't write and didn't want to do it. And so he bought it because he was a gamer and I'd run it for him at a convention. And he started doing like daily cards with her. And they're
Right.
writing this big story together. And she's really excited every morning when she wakes up. Like they pull a card and they write and they add to their story. And that made me cry as a parent and as a teacher. That was
Yeah.
like the most amazing, meaningful thing ever.
Yeah.
And
Beautiful.
I still get like teared up a little bit about it. But so I think it's always great to hear those things. And it's always really great too. Sometimes, like I'll tune into people's streams and like they'll be using it, and that's always really neat and exciting and a little weird too. But
So I'm going to make a guess at something.
Okay.
That working with Samantha Terry was your first big name artist that you worked with.
Yes. Also, Samantha is like a personal friend of mine. She and I
Ah,
cosplayed together. We
nice.
knew each other from cosplaying. So we did a bunch of big cosplay groups together, and she is in a lot of the games that I run. And the AP that you were watching, she plays the unfamiliar in like the bodysuit, the redhead. And so it was one of those things. She's actually one of the first people who taught me how to read tarot. I'd like kind of collected
Oh,
decks and
cool.
stuff. And when it came to it, like it was just like she was my first ask, and I was like, "Hey, Samantha, you've been playtesting this game with me for 3 years. You read tarot and know everything about it, and you're a fantastic, well-known professional artist. Do you think you'd want to do this?" And then she was great about it, and it was amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, because the cards, I don't know how many people on here have seen them, but I want to show a few of these cards. They are beautiful cards.
Yeah, she's so talented as an artist, and she comes from a background of more textile design. So if you've ever bought like a World of Warcraft like garment of any type, or she does Star Trek and a bunch of other things for companies where she draws the pattern that they put on the fabric. And she also knows everything about tarot. So it was oh yeah,
They're just beautiful.
it was just a perfect match. She knew the symbolism without me having to say anything about it. And like I wasn't having to be like, make sure that in this card this happens because it means this. She just knew all about that already. And we got like the basic aesthetic down, and she just rocked it.
Nice. So from you said that you play tested for 3 years, which I'm going to ask about playtesting a little bit.
Yeah.
How many play testers did you have for it, do you think?
Oh.
So from the sound of that, there were a lot.
Yeah, that's a lot. Yeah, I would. Some of them were duplicates, but I generally run it for between 15 and 20 people per convention, and that was 3 or 4 conventions a year for 3 years, so a lot. Like definitely over 100, and then also like having people run it once I got some of those basic decks out and things like that.
Nice.
So 100 plus, 200 plus. I'm not going to do the
Wow.
math on stream because that's not interesting.
And has it been the same with your other products like Starscape that you're getting ready to launch?
Mm-hmm.
Has it had a big playtesting crew too?
Yeah, I've been after Decuma I started working on that at the end of 2017, 18, somewhere in there. It was done and kickstarted in 2020. And after that, early, yeah, March of 2020, we kickstarted. That was great. And then like a little bit later in the year, I got inspired to make Starscape, and I started working on that. And we've been I got a play testable, like very, very rudimentary first draft done. And I usually start playing those pretty immediately, like getting people together that I know just to see if there's something there. Is this an interesting concept? Because there's a lot of space games out there. There's a lot of well done space games out there.
Mm-hmm.
Is there something that feels different about this so it's worth making? Because I don't want to just make, my flavor of vanilla. Like you don't want to do that. You want something to be different about it. So, so did a bunch of mechanics tests, and most of it over Zoom, especially during the beginning because it was the pandemic. And yeah, so I've run that for 3 years now. So it's been in the state that it is now for like very small tweaks, obviously with Powered by the Apocalypse, like you'll make small tweaks to individual moves and stuff. But for over a year now, we've been testing the basic thing that you see now when you play the game.
When you were playtesting, did you have a planned, trackable, organized way of doing it, or was it handed to a bunch of GMs and get notes back and or was it more organized or less organized? Or I don't want to say less organized. Was it more
freeform?
Yes.
It started very freeform. Like when I'm first playtesting, like the very beginning, it's like, what do you think? Would you want to try this again? What did you like? What you didn't like? And then as you get closer to the end, I would get much more dialed in feedback. And sometimes you're clear with players about that. Like, especially when I'm running it, I sometimes won't even, like, I'll make it clear it's a playtest, but I won't ask specific questions. By the time you get to year 3 or so of playtesting, you're looking for observations. You want to see where people stumble when they're playing. They don't know what, they do something and then they don't know what to do next. So you're making notes of those moments that are more observations than asking them for direct feedback. Because I love playtesters, but they're really terrible about giving feedback. Like they're not very good at it usually.
Yeah.
They like giving a lot of suggestions, but they don't really they aren't good at identifying what's not working to them. So it's better to just kind of use your observations. I do sometimes use very specifically written questions about individual elements. And especially when I've been running it at conventions lately with big groups of like 6 people that I didn't know at all. It's like, hi, nice to meet you. Try my game. And then I dial in on a specific thing about the game that I wanted feedback on. Generally, it's like, hey, we tried ship combat this time, and then like I ask very prepared questions like, did it take too long for you? Did you feel like your character had something they could contribute? Like 2 or 3 questions just like that. And then that's kind of the far end of playtesting.
Do you feel that when you were let me rephrase this. So when you're playtesting at a con, for instance, are you running the games, or are you tracking progress and monitoring and observing how other people run the game and take your notes and get your questions answered from there?
I'm still a small enough company that I run most of my own playtests. It's me, myself, and I at my company. Once in a while, I get my friends who go to like run games too. So they'll do that, and then we'll do like a debrief, and I'll be like, hey, when you're running it, look for these specific things. But most of the time, it's me running it at conventions and playtests.
Do you think you're a good playtester? Have you always been a good playtester, and are you good now, or do you think that there's things that you're still missing in your playtester mentality?
As a playtester of other people's games or running my games?
Of your own games.
I have the problem of, again, like being what we call the field trip GM of like, I can make things work. Like okay, you did this weird thing that's not necessarily in your playbook. Okay, interesting. Like, let's make this part of the story and pull it in. And sometimes it takes me longer to identify issues with design because I can make things work. So I make people enjoy my playtests. Whether they're the best at gathering data is
right.
up for debate.
Okay. But you do take a long time with your playtesting, so you may make up for lack in that very specific area with length of testing, so you can really hone in on things as you go.
Yeah. I think that's true, because you also want people to enjoy it, because they, especially at a convention, if they are interested enough in your game pitch to sign up for your game and use one of, we have a limited number of game times that we can play during a convention. They're traveling, they're getting a hotel, they're paying for a badge. You also want them to have a good time. They're not paid playtesters. So I love testing at cons because it's very much in the real element. I've done paid playtesters too, and they give great, very specific feedback that's very helpful, but it's also not going to be your final like customer. So you want to make sure that it's also marketing too, to be honest. Like, they play the game, oh, I helped contribute to this game, and they help hopefully spread the word. But you don't want it to be a purely clinical test at a convention, because you want them to feel like they got their time's worth for the convention.
So let's talk a little bit about, let's get into Starscape.
Okay.
We're already kind of on the edge of it anyway.
Yeah.
So along the lines of what you were just talking about, one of the things you mentioned in your session 0 was you did your starship combat to not be particularly crunchy. Was that why was that choice made? I'm just going to leave it at that.
Because I've played a bunch of space games. I love, I've mentioned Traveler a few times. I've played tons of Traveler, and it is very crunchy. And there are times in space battles where, depending on what your character is, you don't have a lot to contribute for a very long time. So if you're a pilot or a gunner or different things, if you have those skills, you are in it, you're excited, you're having fun. If you make a more face character, talky character, or you have a duke who owns the ship, great, you're gonna sit there, and cheer them on. So I really wanted something that felt dramatic and interesting. I think the thing that is the kind of the disconnect between so many things is, like, we play, we love Star Trek or something, and then we play a Star Trek game, or Star Wars, and we play a Star Wars game, depending on which system. Like West End, I think, things like that. There's lots of different versions of that. But a lot of times in the media we love, space battles are like boom, 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 boom. They're fast. And that's part of the danger of them. And that's part of what makes them exciting. And then just like fights, in fantasy movies versus D&D, or video games versus D&D, it starts dragging on. You've got these long fights. And if not everyone's contributing, then that makes it even longer for those people at the table. So I wanted something that everyone can contribute to, no matter what their skill set was. And then that also went very quickly and was very narrative, and like things went quick. Things went fast, but also were very exciting.
Along that line, you mentioned something in your answer that was a question I had, which is, how dangerous is Starscape, both in personal combat and ship combat?
So Starscape is inspired by like episodic science fiction. So things like Star Trek, Firefly, Farscape, Battlestar Galactica, Babylon 5, and you're like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Those things don't have anything in common. Yes, if you, like me, had a baby in the first few months of, the COVID pandemic, and you couldn't go anywhere, and all you had was TV or net or streaming, you watched all these shows back to back.
Yeah.
And once you start watching them all back to back, you realize that they have the same basic foundation and core, which is the found family aspect, the relationship between the characters. Mm-hmm. Star Trek, as much as you're like, oh, it's about phasers and future and all these things, it's like, it never mattered. Like even the rank structure in Star Trek doesn't usually matter, even though they do their things and they say, oh yes, sir, captain, yes, make it so, all those things. Nobody really pushes back against rank structure until they're causing drama between the characters. So the minute Riker gives someone an order and then they think that they can't do it, and then it's more about, oh, look how they're angry at each other. It's more about that, and are they going to get demoted, than it is about the actual rank structure. It's more about how is Riker going to become friends with Deanna Troi when they disagree again, or whatever it is. That's the heart of all these games. So it doesn't really matter if you have all these shows and all these media. So it doesn't really matter if you're, fighting a Cylon or a Reaver or the Borg. Like, they're all kind of the same. They're the same. They're serving the same function in the story, which is to cause danger that the crew can unite to fight against. And then you take time, and then there's a B plot, and Deanna Troi goes on a date with Worf, and Data has his cat, and all these things that, all these things that are about them and who they are together. And oh my gosh, is Beverly Crusher gonna go date Picard? Oh, look at them. Will they? Won't they? Right. All these things. And you see the same things in all these other shows too, especially like Anara and Mal. And like these same storylines are through all of them. It's just how it's dressed up differently. So that's the thing that Starscape is about. It captures that found family, so you can kind of choose and dress it up as any of those styles of science fiction you like, but make it about the found family. So going back to your question, which was ages ago, Starscape is only as dangerous as you want it to be. There aren't hit points in Starscape at all. It is emotional conditions that get marked. Okay. So you can absolutely be shot, or sliced with a, magical laser sword or whatever you want. And the wound heals in the appropriate amount of plot. But the guilt you feel at having been hit, or the anger that someone didn't watch your back, or the, maybe you're feeling hopeless, or, something else about that stays until you handle it with your crewmates. So you can die in Starscape, but you get to choose when you do that. And you can have no conditions marked. And if you feel like, no, my character would fly the shuttle into that asteroid to save the ship, boom, you can do that. And, and then you roll up another character and all those things. So the system is not about how dangerous space is, which is what I love about Traveler. Traveler is all about how frail humanity is and how dangerous space is.
You can die in
Starscape
character creation.
Yeah, exactly. And that's such a clear statement. Like going back to what I was saying about mechanics making statements. Like if you read the Traveler book, there's nothing that says this game is about how frail you are as a human being. But what other game has you getting old before you're even
Mm-hmm.
out of character creation? So it's like, how do I balance how many skills I have with how old I'm going to be until I start losing my,
Right.
physical abilities? It's a very clear statement.
Yeah.
So by leaving out hit points in Starscape, you can still have combat. You can have very interesting fights, do all those things just like in these episodic sci-fi shows. But, having the conditions, the thing you mark, recenters the game on how you feel about your crewmates and how your crewmates feel about you. And more important, like the trust is the most important thing in Starscape, which is a currency that you can kind of
Yeah.
collect or spend and different things. So it represents, how do your crewmates feel about you right now?
Yeah. That was my next question, was
Okay.
explaining how your positive or negative trust with your crew, you put that at the heart of Starscape. And I think that I know where it came from, but I'm going to let you kind of dive into why trust is the main factor that tells the story of the game. I mean, like you said, that is what this game is about. It's the found family and your level of trust with each other, and whether that works for or against. I even think when I was watching your streams, I was thinking there are sometimes benefits to negative trust with your crew.
Hmm.
So I'll let you explain it, why it mattered, and why that makes it unique. Because I do think it's a very unique trait.
Yeah. Again, like when I was doing my binge watch of all these shows, that seemed to be the crux of everything. And at one point, I was watching Next Generation, I think it was, and Riker has I don't have the quote up, but there's this wild wisdom from like Riker in between like dating people. He basically says, without trust, there is no friendship, there is no relationships, and I forget exactly what the quote is, but he says something like that in one of the episodes, and I was like, oh, that's really interesting, and it just kind of like stuck in my brain
They just
because that's
explained
true.
all sci-fi shows.
Yeah, exactly. Because especially when you're, and being in lockdown in the pandemic, I was looking for something like that. Like I was, like many of us, feeling hopeless and scared and
Yeah.
wondering if this was our new norm forever. So I was very much looking for things that would inspire me and people who were isolated together, like having fulfilling good lives. And I didn't think about that when I started writing Starscape. It wasn't until like much later that someone started talking to me about it. And I realized that, yeah, I'm like writing a game about people living together on a spaceship. They're isolated, they're alone, and they have to make it work together. They have to be able to depend on each other. So there's a lot of in there, and a lot of it's about trust. Do you trust that person, when they go down to the planet to buy all our supplies? Are they going to come back with our supplies? Because if we don't get supplies, we all depend on it. And on a starship, when there's, a few inches of metal between you and the vacuum of space, you have to trust that everyone is going to do their job right, and that everyone has your back, and that everyone's a safe person to be around because you have nowhere else to go. So you may not like how so and so, cooks fish in the microwave in the galley, but if they know how to fix engines really well and they're going to keep your engine running so you've got oxygen to breathe, that's another thing. So it all comes back to, like that isolation, having to depend on the people you're with. And I think that's really where the trust came from. And it's true in real life with friendships too. Like if you don't trust someone, you're never really going to be their friends. And if you don't
Yeah.
trust someone, you're not going to be in a romantic relationship with them. And if you don't trust someone, you're not going to trust them to be your leader.
Yeah.
So it's just like the foundation. It's like the first building block of every relationship. That's just really heightened by being in space.
When I was watching the session zero and then some of the gameplay, I felt there were three things that were being built that I understood early. Character, the characters had to be built,
Hmm.
but they collectively built their ship,
Hmm.
and collectively built at least the nascent parts of the universe around them.
Hmm.
How does trust tie into all of those things? Start the spaceship and the universe. Is it related in some way to that also, or are those Do those all have their own separate mechanics around them?
They all have their they all have a little bit separate mechanics, but it's very much a starting very broadly and then narrowing down. So in Starscape, first you build kind of your universe. You agree, and a lot of it is built, like built on Decuma, but also on Session Zero best practices. Like, okay, what type of science fiction are we going to do? Okay, we're going to do post-apocalyptic, or we're utopian exploration, or space western, whatever you want to do. So if you have an agreement on what that is, that starts to build the first level of understanding and trust. And then you go through and decide, okay, what maturity level are we going to be? Does Earth still exist? And does Earth still exist is a little bit of a deceptive question, because it has a lot of stuff built behind it. Like, if Earth exists in your world, so does all the awful things that have happened on Earth. So that means that people of color have been treated badly, slavery's existed, genocides happened. So you have misogyny. All these things will then be something that either your world has dealt with and has gotten past, like in Star Trek, or something that maybe they've never, if you choose Earth has never existed, maybe they've never existed for any of the people. So that seems like a yes, no, maybe, but it's just a legend. But in that question is built a lot of layers of understanding and safety at the table. So that's just kind of the first broad level. So you get these basic understandings of what is our world like. And then from there, you actually build your ship next. And we did it. This is a kind of new development based on recent playtesting, because that's like your next level, right? That's where you're going to be. So knowing what the ship is like, what is the function of the ship, what is the vibe of the ship, actually really informs how then you make your individual characters. So you go from building the whole universe to this is our shared space / home, because the ship is a big home, that for you, or maybe it's a small home. I've had small ships too. There's lots of different ships you can choose from. And then from there, with that shared understanding, it informs your character creation. So it builds trust between the players as you go too. Because if you're playing with people you don't know, you have no idea what kind of game they want to play. So making sure you're all sharing the same vision is trust between players, which is paramount and also very, very vital.
The tools you built in, first it's built off Powered by the Apocalypse.
Yeah.
But you said it's highly modified. What are some of the big things you've modified away from the original base?
Yeah. I love Powered by the Apocalypse. I've run tons of it. I've run tons of different versions of it. I want it to stay elegant. A lot of people who, my friend has a saying, put a hat on Powered by the Apocalypse. It's like Powered by the Apocalypse with like a thing on top of it that doesn't necessarily feel like it belongs, but it's just different. So I really wanted to make my editions feel elegant and seamless and like they're part of it. So I did add skills, which is something that's been tried before, and I've never found a version that I liked. So skills are very flexible. You have, a fighting skill, and you can pitch it to me on any move. And if it makes sense, then you get a +1 to whatever that move is. So, I had someone who was playing the hot shot, a famous pilot, the other day, and she's like, well, I'm trying to get past these guards who already, are fans of mine, because you can take fame as one of the moves for the hot shot. And it's like, can I use my piloting to try and, distract them while my friends get by them? I'm like, sure. How are you going to do that? And she's like, well, I'm going to start talking about this big maneuver I did one time. So piloting was absolutely applicable in that situation for getting past the guards. So I want people to be creative like that and flexible in a way that brings forth their characters' backstories and expertise in a fun, creative way. So obviously, if she was flying the ship, then yes, also piloting would be a +1 there. But I don't want it just to be like, oh no, you're talking to them. Obviously, you can't use piloting, even if you're talking about very specific piloting things. Like, I want it to be narrative still, which I think is one of the big strengths of Powered by the Apocalypse. And then the trust that I was talking about a minute ago, that's another big add. It's something you actually have to spend to access some moves. So there's a section, there's the basic moves, which you play Powered by the Apocalypse are pretty standard form with like a little bit of
Yeah.
like space stuff dripped on top of them. But then there's a section called crew moves, and those are 5 moves that you can use only with other PCs, and they are all about relationships. And you have to invest or spend trust to access those moves. So if you're going to connect with a
Oh.
crewmate, or and that means be vulnerable with them and open up and see how they react, or if you're going to criticize them or give them advice, or if you're going to ask them to trust you, like, I know how to get us out of the situation, you have to spend your trust, and you might get it back. Because if they go with you and they agree with you, it's a good interaction. Great. You'll get trust back and you might get more trust. But just like in relationships, when you're going and talking to someone, you're like, hey, I don't think how you did this was right. Sometimes that ends well, and sometimes it ends in like a damaged relationship and less trust.
Hmm.
So that's kind of how that mechanic works there, which is I've play tested that a ton to try and make that as elegant as possible and simple.
Yeah. I happen to run a lot of games that are very personality and drama heavy,
Yes,
which you also do.
I do.
So, it kind of runs right up my alley. So I'm very excited to see it
Excellent.
come out.
Yay.
Do you see Starscape? This is a question I ask a lot of creators of tabletop role playing games, and often they don't have an answer or they have the generic answer.
Mhm.
Do you see it as fit best for short form games or long form games?
I've actually designed it to be for long form games. You can do one shots. I've done it. But I like to liken it to a good soup or a stew. Like the longer these characters are in the same environment together, like mixing, blending, like you're gonna get a better, more rich game because it's meant to have these things that over time, like so and so's bugged you about this so many times, and then you have to talk to them about it, or maybe you confront them about it, or maybe you develop feelings for so and so, or long form, you have a cause that you've been fighting for and you left it, but now because you've been inspired by your crewmates, you feel like you need to go back. So it's really about those long form stories. So each individual session is more about like, oh, exploration or facing threats or, handling obstacles. But long
Right.
form, the campaign is about those relationships and how they gain and lose trust in each other, like while they're journeying through space.
So that being the case, is it difficult to integrate new players into a longer running storyline?
I wouldn't think so. Usually, no. We've all seen it happen on TV shows too. So what
Yep.
happens basically, someone pulls a playbook, they take the same number of advances as kind of the average for the group. And this is the same thing if someone decides their character dies, or you can choose to leave the crew too, because that happens
Mhm.
too. Like if you get to a point where your character would not trust or would not stay with them or isn't trusted by anyone else, then you probably wouldn't stick around. So you can also, bring in a new character at that point. And then, it's like that. They have a little bit of trust and they kind of earn more and find their place. And hopefully they have a better reception than some of the mid-season characters that get introduced on some of our favorite shows.
So I don't know which of these questions I want to ask for next. I have so many, and I'm torn between two. Okay, I'm gonna go with this one. So, do you feel okay? There's a type of game that wasn't mentioned in all of them that is still science fiction, and I'm wondering whether it would be a good fit. So the Alien franchise is science fiction. It's a very dark, very brooding. Trust is at a premium.
Yep.
Do you think that I don't know whether you've tried Starscape in a game like that, or do you feel like Starscape would work for something like that, or is it really built more for, I don't want to say the lighter side, but less demanding of life and limb, I guess, than the other games?
Yeah, it's not optimized for that. I actually had someone run it, and they messaged me about it in Discord, and they ran an Alien game,
Oh wow.
and they said it went really well. They really liked it. I didn't get like a ton of information about if they had to modify anything. I should reach out to them and get more information on it. But they said it worked really, really well for those moments where people were scared and confronted each other, and you had a lot
Mhm.
of those great moments together where and then suddenly someone goes off by themselves. So I don't know exactly how they modified it to be like, oh, your character's dead now, because like everyone dies in Alien. Eventually people die. But they said they were very happy with how it performed there. I will say it's not designed for that. It is designed more for the longer form, like season, like TV sci-fi that has like that found family element. But it has been done.
You had mentioned when in your character background development questions that you were in. And this was when you're in your session 0 that you were inspired by Wanderhome. So do you want to speak to any of the inspiration that you had? I would say towards Starscape, but also just as a designer, a game designer in general. I mean, I don't want to go too far off Starscape because I still have more here to go here, but
yeah. Well, Possum Creek Games is really great about creating a vibe or sort of a feeling when you read their games. So even before you get to like some of the actual mechanics of it, just the way the phrasing they choose in the actual game book itself starts lending itself to the setting and the heart of what, as I was saying, heart, every game has a heart, the heart of their game ahead of time. And if you read Wanderhome just as like a study in game writing, it's fascinating. And I haven't gotten to play it as much as I'd like, but a lot of it is very specific. Like, the fighter who's, I can't remember what the name of the playbook is right now. It's like you have a sword, and you're never, and if you ever draw it, you have to get a new character. You can't be that, things like that, because it's about the characters, not what they're doing. Yeah. And the whole kind of traveling home vibe is written in every paragraph, every sentence, every bit of that book. And I like that vision of games. I like that it's not just an instruction manual, that it is something that is also inspiring and sets the tone for what you want people to experience in the games as well.
Yeah, I feel that's actually the difference between what I would call modern TTRPGs and the original TTRPGs is that the setting became much more about creating a tone that you'd go through for the rest of it, and they were made to fit a certain type of play or style of play, when in the past it was mostly just rule sets, often based on, pulling things from wargaming and what have you into...
Yeah. Now, a lot of those rule sets had very clear messages, like we were just talking about Traveler a minute ago, in them. But if you read the Traveler book, that feeling isn't in there. Like, it doesn't write in a little bit of a dramatic way that's like, life in space is really dangerous. It takes a long time to learn skills. So I think we've just got to a point where we're seeing the game as a piece of art, but also now we're, and I think that's been in the past, but I think now we're looking at even the method of delivery of the rule sets being part of that experience. And I think that's a cool improvement.
Was there ever a moment when you were, and I'm going to ask if you've been proud of something, but proud that your game withstood the onslaught of what characters do to games being tested and played?
Absolutely. I was running it at Big Bad Con last year, and I'd run it a bunch of times. I was, chill about it. It was fine. And they decided they wanted to do a heist. And so it's somehow our space game became about this huge heist from a giant space casino. And I was like, I have no idea if my game can do this. I have no idea. And I was like, well, try it. Yeah. Yes. And it worked great. And it was so much fun. And I shouldn't have been so surprised, like thinking back, like really reflecting, if you're watching, Ocean's 11 or anything. Most heist things are kind of found family stories too, where they all work together and they all have relationships, and are we going to trust so-and-so to pull off their piece of the heist? So all the pieces were there. I didn't know, because there's not a lot of like the playbooks themselves have fighting mechanics, but in the basic moves, there's like one move to fight things. Yeah. So I'm like, all right, we're going to see. And it ended up being so much fun, and it worked really well. So that was a huge surprise and also really exciting.
How fast? So, because based on Powered by the Apocalypse, it's assumed that play or action is pretty fast. Mm-hmm. Did you add things on top slowed it up a little bit, or is it still just
No,
as
it's still
fast
super
as
fast.
it's always been?
Yeah,
Okay,
as fast
nice.
as it's always been.
Are there, outside of trust, are there other interesting narrative tools that you've built in? I'm going to give an example. Blades in the Dark has a flashback mechanism that is just beautiful.
Yeah.
Trust is your beautiful mechanism. Do you have other ones that you've built in that you're like, this? It's more than just trust in your game.
Yeah, it's something I'm really proud of. Like, I don't know if it's I don't know if it's on the level of the flashback mechanic, because that's amazing. But I really like how you choose your skills in my game. There's a question posed. You pick your playbook, and then you choose a character, like a background for your character. So, for example, you can be the civilian, and the civilian can choose an entrepreneur, a diplomat, or a religious leader as their backgrounds. So it's like, okay, you're going to be an entrepreneur like Anara or Quark, or you're going to be, the Karin or whoever you want to be from all these different things. I'm really into like Star Trek today. I usually pull more from other things, but like, Star Trek's on my brain. Under that, there's a question that's posed to you, and it's like, if you're the entrepreneur, it's like, choose two things you would do for a profit and one thing you would never do. So by choosing, and then there's a pick list with different things written there. And then by choosing those things, that gives you your skills to start. And then the thing
Oh,
you
wow.
cross off takes a skill away that you can't choose through advancements until much later in the game.
Oh,
So
that is
it's
beautiful.
thank you.
That's
I
very
really like it.
interesting.
I'm very proud of it. So it gives you simultaneously like a lot of choice, like, and all, and there are people who push against it, who want it to like maximize their characters or whatever,
Of
but
course.
you can't really maximizing characters in PBTA isn't so much of a thing usually.
Yeah.
But it really informs you of your character's boundaries, of who your character is, and also why they have these skills. If you've chosen, you know, uh, you work with shady politicians, so you got politics as a skill because you're like, and then it shows, okay, you don't have any boundaries when it comes to, politicians who may not be doing the best things for those people. And that tells you a lot about your character just by giving you the skill.
Right. That's actually very fascinating. Really interesting.
Thank you.
So, I mean, that to me is a balance mechanism, an inter-character balance mechanism. Are there intra-character balance mechanisms, tools to balance the different players' characters, or is balance really not a focus to character development?
In my opinion, PBTA actually works when there isn't balance between, as far as the character's abilities. PBTA really sings when each playbook is really unique and really different, and then they find ways to come together because it gives everyone those moments to shine. And instead of having those, that's one of the things that makes, I think, combat and so many of the things so dynamic and powered by the apocalypse, because you're not expecting, one playbook to fight and also all the other playbooks to be able to fight. And I think sometimes when people don't understand the system well, they try and make them even, like you would in like D&D or something else, but that just kind of ends up for sort of a bland game. So there's like, there's very, they have reason, sorry, let me think. The crew moves are how they interact together with each other, and it's about their emotional interactions. That is how they work together. That is the mechanic that brings them together or pushes them apart if it's not working. The playbook's actual abilities are designed very specifically to be specific. If you are the civilian, you are not going to be able to fly. I mean, maybe you could take piloting. Like, piloting is an option, but like you're going to have like a +1 in it ever. Versus the hotshot, who's going to get like +3 if they, pick the right things. So, because that's their job. Like you're
Right.
not going to have Starbuck like with Anara. Anara wants to go talk to a politician, she's going to do a great job of it. She's the face character. If
Yeah.
you send Jane to go do that, that's not going to end well because he's going to use his gun persuasion. He's just going to try and intimidate them. So even if you look in these shows, and this is why PBTA does a great job of mimicking media so often,
Mm-hmm.
These characters are very different on purpose. If everybody on the ship can fight like Jane and talk like Inara, it's a boring show.
Yeah. Yeah, you have cookie cutters or
Yeah,
cardboard
exactly.
characters.
And they're the same. And then it's like people don't get as many moments to shine. If everybody can do everything, what's special about you?
Right. Around that, you build your character and then you build your ship and the universe. Why did you go as far as all the intricacies of building the ship and the universe? Why? Because there's a lot of detail. I mean, when I was watching you
Yeah.
build, there was a lot of things discussed in coming to the consensus on the ship and then the beginnings of the universe.
Well, specifically, the beginnings of the universe, again, for the safety reasons. You want everyone to know where they are and what they're doing. If one of you wants to play, a gritty Battlestar Galactica, we're on the edge, we're barely surviving, and one of you wants to play, Star Trek, that's not going to be compatible. So you really want to make that understanding. The ship, because it is the heart of these shows. So often kind of like the sun in the middle of a solar system, if you would, to get really like sciency and spacey about it. Everything revolves around the ship and coming back to the ship. It is their home. So even on like big scales, like the Enterprise D versus like Serenity, they keep coming back to that. This is their safety. Again, they are isolated together, and this is what they're depending on for survival. So having that shared understanding and having everybody have a say in making the ship gives the players that feeling of ownership, that like they get to customize it themselves. So they start off the game with a fondness in their hearts already as players that is immediately sort of transferred to their player characters. It also, because it is a very rules light system, like there's not a lot of mechanics with the ships. So everyone has to have a shared understanding so that they know what it can do and what it can't do and how it works. Because it's like there's not a propulsion system. Like you don't roll for speeds or things like that generally. Like why it's not that kind of system. If you want that system, go play Star Trek Adventures. Like this is not a how many damage does a phaser do system. This is a what do you feel like when you get shot by a phaser system? So by making sure like, okay, we chose the living being as our ship. Okay, it uses big flippers to fly through space versus, oh, we chose the light freighter, and it uses, a basic combustion engine. Like those are very big flavor choices that affect your narrative, but mechanically have very little difference if you really are breaking it down in the system itself.
Right. Could you build a TARDIS?
Ooh. I don't, there are no mechanics for like space and time. So if you were willing to hand wave it, probably.
Right.
That's also not one of the playbooks. Maybe I should add that as like a Kickstarter, like stretch goal or something.
I just thought of it when
yeah,
you're explaining it. I was like, somebody could be the Doctor Who, but everybody else be the companions, or maybe everybody's Doctor Who's. I don't know.
Yeah. It probably would do the characters of Doctor Who really well. I don't know if it would do the TARDIS really well, but as far as making it a home, yes. As far as actually traveling through space and time, I guess there's no reason it wouldn't, because it's not like the Doctor once in a while gets it wrong, but it's not like there's not like a die roll involved in.
No, it just means your space travel is basically instant all the time.
Yeah.
Because there's no point in it not.
Yeah.
When you were, what void in the marketplace do you think Starscape fills?
Well,
because there's obviously not a game that fulfilled your requirement for something,
right? Which is why I made it. Honestly, like I was like watching all these sci-fi shows. I was very lonely. I had my new baby, and I was like, oh, I'll start running a game online with my friends, because that was like most of we all game together. That was like, I think that was one of the things that was like why it was one of the reasons. I mean, everything was so hard about it at the time, being in lockdown. But like I was used to seeing my friends multiple times a week gaming in person, because I was lucky enough to have people to game with in person. And to suddenly have that gone, it was really hard. And I was also going through like postpartum, like just everything, and like, oh my gosh, a human life depends on me. Well, everyone is in like this state of chaos. It was just a very emotional time. So I was going to turn to gaming as kind of like, okay, this is going to be my normal thing that I'm going to do. and I wanted to run something that was like Star Trek. And I looked at all the spacey games that I could find, and none of them captured the thing that I loved so much about it, the thing that was giving me comfort by watching it, which was the relationships between the characters. I looked at Star Trek Adventures. I looked at, a whole bunch of other different ones, the Fantasy Flights, Star Wars stuff, which I'd played a bunch before, and things like that. And it just, none of it, like all of it seemed so focused on, okay, what is the exact damage that this specific weapon does, or this specific, there's just so many different roles that were all about the technology. And I didn't care about that. And honestly, if you watch those shows, the writers don't really care about that either.
Nobody actually cares about it.
Yeah, nobody.
Nobody.
I have found that actually fans of those shows very much care about those things, and they have told me that my game is wrong because I don't care about those things.
The tech wouldn't matter to them if they didn't love the characters and the stories.
Exactly.
The tech is there as support.
Exactly. It is like window dressing. It is just part of the setting. And honestly, the fans have made more like hard science out of Star Trek than the writers ever did. So yeah, it didn't matter to them. So that I couldn't find a game that captured that. And so I was like, okay, well, I've got time on my hands. I guess maybe I'll give it a shot. And so I started working on that.
I've only seen one show, sci-fi, that had pretty good hard sci-fi tech, and that was The Expanse.
Yes.
And they were famous for it.
Yeah.
But the characters and the stories were amazing.
Yeah.
The tech it would have been irrelevant if
it
the
was
stories
the frosting
were bad.
on the cake. Yeah.
The stories were great. They also put great time into that.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody believes in lightsabers, but they're cool when they're in the right hands.
Yeah, I mean, I have nothing against lightsabers. You can have lightsabers, but that's not why we watch. I mean,
right.
they're very cool, but that's not why we watch. Star Wars stuff.
Right.
Like,
it was the eye candy.
Yeah, exactly.
It took you 3 years, you said, to develop. What were the biggest stumbling blocks, and when did you feel it was ready to start sharing to the world a little bit?
The trust mechanic and the conditions. It went through a few iterations of how those things interacted and worked together with the characters' stats and things like that. There was a bunch of different ideas that I went through and would try them, and it would work for a little while, and then we'd hit like a place where you would hit the bottom and you couldn't get back out of it even if you wanted to, like trust or things like that. So once you have all your conditions marked, we got to a point where in some of those old mechanics where it's like, okay, well now I can't clear any because I don't have this and I don't have that and I can't do that without any trust. So it was just like playing, and the hardest thing is always giving up an idea. Like I had a cool idea. Obviously it's not going to work mechanically. It's just too complicated, or it's inelegant, or people don't access it. Like that's the other thing, is like cutting the excess fat. Like there's so many little parts of this game that I love that I ended up cutting and they aren't there anymore. And it's a better game for it. Yeah. But I'll always be a little sad about those great ideas that added, but just were one too many things for players to worry about. So they would forget about it and not use it. Because I'd rather have a system with a few really great mechanics that are used constantly or often than have something that has a bunch of really cool ideas that, oh, I keep forgetting to use that, or things like that. So really that's been the hardest thing, is just all those things. You're like, oh, this is so cool, and it's so in universe, it's so. That's the hardest thing.
Oh, you froze for one moment. Oh, awful. Since it's built to emulate, I don't want to say necessarily emulate 100%, but built around to emulate serial storytelling, is there a structure to a session?
There's not a prescribed one in the quick start. I'm probably going to have in the full version of the game, I do have a little bit of an outline. But again, being a very improv GM, I sort of bounce off of that naturally. If I almost never use that in a game, even if it's prescribed, but I know some people really like that that format. So I probably will have some description of that and some things for that eventually in the full book.
Yeah, Tales from the Loop and Things from the Flood, they do have a structure around it.
Yeah.
That is built to tell serial stories. And I thought it was interesting because when you were talking about it, I was like, I don't know whether it was an influence, but I could see there would be kind of there's definitely, I think you both found different tracks to a similar idea in doing that. And I think it's a cool, I love the mechanic. I don't want to say call it mechanic. I love the structure, but having that little bit of structure, even though I ignore it 85% of the time.
Yeah, it's helpful. I'm going to have like adventures and stuff with it. That those follow like kind of a prescribed, inspired honestly by Free League, because they do amazing work. I love their stuff. And they do really great adventures that are super easy to follow and really rich. So I love them. That kind of have a structure. So it'll probably be something like that, that with the full book.
Is Starscape going to any VTTs?
That will be one of our stretch goals.
Nice.
So hopefully, so we'll see. Fingers crossed. Probably, Roll20 is still the most accessed one. That's not just D&D.
Yeah.
So that'll probably be the first one. And then I've heard a lot of great things about Foundry too. So we'll look into that. So there's a lot of options now. They're getting more and more options all the time.
Yeah, there's a lot of them now. I love Alchemy right now. I was using Shard for a while. Foundry is very nice. A little complicated, I think, but
yeah,
I've heard
great things about Alchemy, but last I checked, they were invite only. You can't just put your game up there.
Oh.
So, but they've had a thing where if like Kickstarters do well enough, they have been offering invites. So if you really like them, write Alchemy and be like, hey, this game is kickstarting. I think you should have it on your platform. And I would love that.
I'll suggest.
Yeah.
Not that I'll have any sway, but I'll suggest.
You'd be amazed. Like a customer caring enough to actually email a company about something like that has a lot more influence than you'd think.
I've emailed them 3 or 4 times and they've always replied. They have great customer support. So.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. So what are the questions you get asked by players who are about to play it, who've never played it, like at a con, on the way in and on the way out? Going in to play a game and when they're finished playing a game.
Yeah.
Like, what are the big questions you get asked?
The one I always like at the end is like, oh, so when is this kickstarting? Like, that's the one I love. I think most of the time when I it sounds bad, but I love when we're coming in and they're like, oh, you designed this? Like a little bit of like surprised. I think, even then, as much as I was talking about, the hobby changing, like I still don't fit what most people think of when they think of a TTRPG designer when they see me. So I don't know, make of that what you will. So there's always like that little bit, and I always feel like I have to prove myself a little bit more. But also people really love playing with the designer, so maybe I'm just like paranoid about that. So that's something they ask. They also ask about the hit points almost always at the very beginning. And I'm like, trust me, it works without it. And and then by the end, they usually are like, yeah, no, this is great. It's, it tells a different type of story. It's not about whether I'm going to survive. It's about how we go together.
Yeah.
Which is the intent.
Yeah. I love games like that. I think I think hit points are a default fallback that is holding back a lot of good game ideas.
Yeah. And I wish more designers would give up the idea that death is the worst thing that can happen in a role-playing game. And that there are a lot of things that can be, not the worst thing. Like there's a lot of worse things that can happen to characters, but like that it doesn't have to be about that. Like that's not the finality that characters have to be striving against. That it can be about other things.
A GM that was going to run it, what advice would you give somebody, a new GM, not a new GM to TTRPGs, but a GM potentially looking at this as a game that they would want to bring on and run? What advice would you give them? Yeah,
there is actually a big GM section of even the quick start, because it's something that I think is really, really important, and something I as a GM myself, I know what I wish I'd known when I first started running things. So the things are, keep the ship a home. Like this has to stay their home. That doesn't mean it always has to be a safe place. It can cause problems. Like, Firefly out of gas is one of the best episodes ever.
Yes.
And that was Firefly's fault. That's Serenity's fault. So it can be, you can point out how dangerous the universe is, but when it comes back to it, like it needs to be their home. And I that's my first thing. Make danger, make space dangerous but full of opportunities and interesting things. So they, keep them moving, keep them going from place to place. They have a nomadic lifestyle, whoever this crew is. So it feels like they're in one place all the time, but it's just
Right.
because the ship's their home. Their home is moving. And then like there's the whole in PBTA, there's like the agendas for the GM and stuff like that. But my other thing is like ask them how they're feeling as often as you ask what they do. So in the middle of a fight, stop. The fight doesn't actually stop when you as the GM ask a question. Like the fight is still happening. If you're like, Warrior, how do you feel right now? And and make them think about it and talk about it for a second before you're like, okay, so what do you do about that? You get such a rich scene, excuse me, rather than just something that's just action based.
Yes, and when you GM, you actually GM with quite a lot of narrative and description. And I thought it was interesting. You never asked them, what do you do? You always asked them things like, what would your character do in this kind of environment?
Yeah.
Which that struck me because so many GMs fall into the simple trope of what is your action, when action isn't necessarily what you should be doing at the moment. And a lot of times it can be the worst thing you do is to just go into action. But that's very interesting. Watching your jamming style is interesting to see. I liked it.
Yeah, I think it's important to set the scene for the players so that they're thinking about all those things and reminding them, because they're thinking about a lot of stuff. So like reminding them of kind of the greater situation rather than just what are you going to do?
Yeah. Can we talk for briefly about virgins and vixens? Okay, so it's not my place to describe it, so I'm going to let you describe it, and then I'll bring in some questions.
Okay. Excuse me, got like a frog in my throat for a second.
Oh, sorry.
So, Virgins and Vixens was actually the first game I ever designed, even before Decuma. So it is a feminist, rules light feminist role playing game about the tropes of women in mythology, lore, and different and folklore, basically. Excuse me, sorry. So basically, what you do, you start as a two-dimensional trope of women from fairy tales or folklore or myths, and as you play, you get empowerments, which is kind of like XP. And once you get enough of them, then you get to change the description of your character. So it's kind of a tag-based system where you have specific words that describe you that you get to use in your actions. So you might start as the prize, which is kind of our usual princess in the tower. Like, oh, I am the princess. I am beautiful, and I can take no actions on my own. I will wait for someone to save me, which happens all the time. Yeah. And even if you actually read the original fairy tales, and a lot of them, they don't even name them. They're just the princess. And the story is all about them being rescued, but they never even get a name. So you start as that trope, or there's also like the witch who is educated. How dare a woman have any education or know things? They must be evil. So you start as these tropes, very much leaning into the trope. So if you are the prize, you are probably, you get to pick 3 descriptor tags. You're probably beautiful and charming and vapid. You have to pick one that's not so great. And so the first time you get to something and you're like, oh, you have to climb over this fence. Okay, so you roll the dice, and every time you fail, kind of inspired by PBTA, which you do a lot at the beginning of the game, you fail a lot. You get an empowerment every time you fail. So then eventually you can change one of those words. Okay, I'm not vapid anymore. I'm athletic now. So now you're, if you climb enough fences, then you start being good at it. So it's basically about learning from failure. And eventually you break out of this two-dimensional trope and become a person with feelings and a varied skill set and things like that.
It reminded me, the moment that I read just the description, it reminded me of the Bechdel-Wallace test. Have you ever heard of that in film?
Oh, yes.
I was like, oh my God, she turned this into a game. This is brilliant.
Thank you.
So, were you inspired by that, or did you find that after you had started creating?
I'm from LA, and
So
a lot of
it was
people
all
are in
over.
the industry that I know,
Okay.
so I knew about that long ago. I honestly, I didn't think about that with the making of the game, but I'm a feminist. It's something that's very close to my heart. Um, there was an itch.io game jam about mythology and folklore. It was a folklore jam. So I was gonna, okay, this is gonna be my first thing. I've got 2 weeks to make a game. What am I gonna write it about? What mythology do I like? What folk tale do I want to do it about? And I couldn't think of one that was very empowering towards women, because that's generally what I like writing. And that kind of in and of itself became an idea, like, and an observation. And I was like, well, maybe that will be my game, as a commentary on how folklore and mythology, and fairy tales so often are so misogynistic, even though a lot of the fairy tale merchandise and stuff is made for girls.
Yeah. Do
So it
you?
kind of became like this large commentary that is also fun to play.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, Virgins and Vixens is definitely commentary. Do you feel that female and non-binary representation in game design, current game design, is as poorly handled and represented as TV, film? I wouldn't say literature at this point, but even literature, I guess. To
Even literature,
even
yeah.
modern literature, there's still some of that. I think there's been a lot of pushback on that side more than the others. But do you think that game designers are still falling into the tropes as much as in those other media?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's still um that's honestly why I started Golden Lasso Games. That's why I started my own game company instead of pitching, because I did pitches to different companies, and even people I respected. Every company, not every company, but most companies who are at a place to accept pitches of other people's games are still run, um even if they are, diverse and things like that. Most of the time, the top people at these game companies are still men.
Yeah.
So it everything still kind of goes through that filter, even if they are very cognizant of it, and even if they're trying to support creators and not, and pull their voice out of it and let people have their own voice. There's still that filter. It's like, okay, who helped write it? Who helped, all those things. So I could never have gotten something like Virgins and Vixens past anyone at these companies. Not because they don't believe in feminism,
Mm-hmm.
but because it's just something that it, people feel very uncomfortable with it unless they have kind of like experienced it. Um, and there's some great companies out there, and like Evil Hat does a great job of really supporting creators and things like that. They're still at the top. Like, if you still look at the who's making most
Mm-hmm.
of the decisions, it's just there. And
Yeah.
it's sort of it's better. You're starting to see more variety in people who are in the top part of these companies, but for the most part, it's still not the very top ownership or the very top decision makers. You see a lot more now where okay, our social media or our art director is this person.
Are you?
Where, yeah.
Yeah. Are you planning on reprinting? Because I see that it's sold out on your site. So, which I got
Virgin
to
and
say, when I
Vixens.
saw, I was like, yeah, Virgins and Vixens. I was like, oh, that's awesome. A lot of people have bought it. But then I thought, I don't know how long it's been sold out. Maybe there's not a
No.
reprint coming.
Well, we're actually I'm after I'm done with Starscape, I'm going to be kind of repackaging it, because honestly, it was only ever designed to be like a digital thing.
Uh-huh.
And so when I first got Decuma and I did my first couple conventions with the table, I didn't want Decuma to be the only thing there.
Right.
So I had like a local printer do like a 500 run of just like
Uh-huh.
these little magazine booklets of Virgins
Right.
and Vixens, because I did not think anyone would want it, honestly. And not it was my first game. I literally wrote the thing in like 2 weeks. And it sold like wildfire. Like, I ran
Yeah.
out my first day of the ones I'd brought to the con, and people were buying Decima too. But it was just one of those things that, like, it got to be where someone would be walking down the aisle and I could see them see it and react. And it gets strong reactions either way. Like, people walk up to it and want it immediately, or they walk by and they make like some jerk comment about it. And then, that's always super fun to deal with.
Yeah.
But so it's very interesting how kind of polarizing even just the title and the cover are.
Who are some of the creators out there that you really respect the way that they've built the top of the company or the top? I mean, it could be streamers, it could be publishers. I mean, there are people who are pushing back against
Mm-hmm.
the patriarchic top line of companies. So, who
Mm-hmm.
are some others that you've seen that you're like you respect what they're doing and how they're doing it?
I already mentioned Possum Creek Games.
Mm-hmm.
They're doing a great job of that.
Yeah,
And gosh, that's such a like on the top of my head. Snowbright Games is doing
love
great
them.
work with that. They specifically work with the LGBTQ community,
Mm-hmm.
and they're actually kind of piloting this interesting model. Most of the time, if you have someone else publish your game, you sell away most of the income from it. You're
Yep.
lucky if you get like 20% is a high percentage, and that's
Yep.
usually after they've recouped their costs of publishing.
Yeah.
Snowbright is sort of working and trying to figure out a model where they share some of the costs and then also share the revenue with their creators, which is really interesting. MythWorks is doing a great work there. They did Wild Sea recently.
Mm-hmm.
Ray just is a phenomenal creator and also just really helps like push for representation in the space and has a really good model where they share, once they recoup their costs, they share 50-50 with their creators, which is super special
Beautiful.
and really
Yeah.
rare in the industry.
Yeah. Um, that led me though down the rabbit hole that is Kimi Hughes to your function within Gamma, where you are taking what you learned. It seems like you're taking what you learned with Virgins and Vixens, and later with other things, but the zeitgeist of that into supporting small creators that are bringing representation to games with a pretty big name organization behind it.
Yeah. So I'm part of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee at Gamma. And Gamma is the Game Manufacturers Association for people who aren't in the industry. Like people who aren't making games don't know who they are, but they're the biggest organization of game makers. Of that, tabletop RPGs are a very tiny sliver, like such a tiny percentage of the market. They're the ones who take like I don't know wings. I don't know what's called Wingspan. Like all these things, Monopoly, all these things. All of that is also part of
Yeah.
Gamma's like that's their big bread and butter is all these party games and board games and things like that. Tabletop RPGs are there as well. We're trying to like build ourselves up, but yeah, they're a huge organization. And I was lucky enough, I applied for what's called the Horizons Fellowship this last cohort, and I was accepted. They accept 6 publishers and they accept 6 retail fellows. And retailers have to have like a brick and mortar or almost having a brick and mortar store.
Right.
And it's basically an intensive where they provide you with a mentor who's been in the industry for a long time. You meet with them monthly. They have like 2 or 3 like AMAs and panels a month that you attend where you can like have direct access to industry professionals and ask them about specific topics like your Amazon store or getting a trademark or play testing or whatever it is and get that straight from the horse's mouth, as it were. And they also provide some scholarships and travel stipends for you to go to a couple different events. That was life changing, totally changed everything about how I was running my company and what I thought I knew about running a company, and just an amazing experience. And I made fast friends that I will have forever now through the whole process. Um, as part of that, like I felt after I was done with it that I needed to pay it forward, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
So I stepped up with Ray from MythWorks, who I mentioned earlier, and we're co-chairing the fellowship this year. So the committee that runs it. So we have taken it over. We've kind of given it. I have in my day job, I'm a teacher, so I have a master's degree in administration and policy studies, specifically curriculum. So we took what the foundation they built and have kind of taken it to the next level thanks to my day job specialty and like
Right.
really planned everything out about how, the fellows are going to learn on this continuum this year. And the application's opened recently. So if you are a game designer or a retailer who has started in the last few years, there's a whole list. If you go to gamma.org/horizons, you'll find there's a whole thing there. But specifically, the Horizons Fellowship serves communities that are underrepresented in the gaming industry. So specifically, women, uh, BIPOC individuals, LGBTQ individuals. There's a whole bunch of different things there that you can qualify, but it's specifically to lift this up and start trying to help change the industry and change the face of the industry.
So, I mean, I think it's an amazing story. I think that it's also a wonderful bridge from where you started to where you've gotten to now. Spam. To where you've gotten to now, in that you've come full circle by creating this game for feminist empowerment, and you've turned it into an industry leader helping create games for women's empowerment, for empowerment of marginalized communities. I don't want to say women, marginalized communities.
Yeah.
There's such beauty in going full circle and hearing it in story.
Yeah, it was something that was already something that I was very passionate about. So being accepted, seeing the potential of the program, and trying to get, that opportunity to more people is something that I'm just really passionate about. And it's my game company is Golden Lasso Games because I am a huge Wonder Woman fan. So, there's this Amazonian element to like everything I do in life. I started as a Wonder Woman cosplayer and and I was also like a weightlifter. I wanted to be like the Wonder Woman that looked like an Amazon. I could actually
Right.
and I
That's
loved
cool.
that. And from there, it kind of just spiraled. So now I'm working and like even Starscape, like the Starscape team, there's only 5 of us because it's a very small thing, but like we're all marginalized individuals in the industry. So we're all women, non-binary, or people of color. So it's something that's very important to me. It's, very close to my heart and something that I really want uh, I want to start creating these, ecosystems of these incredibly talented people who can support each other and create these amazing things so it starts becoming normalized.
Yeah, I love it. I think it's a beautiful story, and it's one that I hope we see more and more of it going forward.
Yeah.
The industry is a changing, and I think most of
Hopefully,
us are
very
happy that it
slowly,
is.
but
Yeah,
yes, it is changing, but it's not changing quickly enough. It's not
yeah,
keeping up with the times, I feel, in a lot of ways. And it takes people like standing up and pushing for it and fighting for that and most importantly putting money behind that. And I would love to see more companies and more organizations do what Gamma's done and like say, okay, we are going to sponsor this. We're going to get people to come and talk to you so you can make better games, so you can run better Kickstarters, so you can get your stuff out there. Because so many people, the creativity is not what's lacking. It's the
yeah,
access and people even like replying to your emails. So it's such a challenge. And it just needs to be something that we all put focus and intent towards and actually actions because we can all say we want it to be a diverse industry, but if you're not actually doing something like going and buying a game from someone who's from a marginalized community or telling a retailer you want them to carry this game or any of those things, there's so many things you can do on the consumer side of it too,
yeah,
retweeting or whatever it is on social media to asking a convention, we have so and so as a speaker. All these things help build the profile of creators who are marginalized in ways that wouldn't usually happen because again the industry, especially the publishing side of the industry, is still predominantly straight white men, like, and a lot of them are very well meaning and a lot of them are not, and a lot of them are very actively hostile still. And
yeah,
you as the customer have so much power in that because the only thing that they hate more than maybe losing their spot is not making any money. So if their company can make money off of something, or if their convention will have more people there, or if they think they'll sell more tickets or whatever it is, that's one of the biggest motivators for actual change and not just like lip service.
Money's almost always the key to actual change.
Yes.
So, I want to thank you for joining me and talking about all this amazing stuff. I'm very excited for Starscape. It is launching July 9th, correct?
Yes, Tuesday, a couple days.
So just a couple of days away. You must be just buried with things you're taking care of right now.
It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. The
Fire's all around
gif
you.
of like the sipping coffee with everything burning around you. It's like me right now.
Right. Well, I wish you luck, but also I know that you have the talent and the skill and the support around you to make it work. I, for one, will definitely be backing, but I'll push it as much as I can, and I hope that you find tons of support and that it leads to a lot more fellowship in games, because I love seeing that, and that's what it seems to be. Its core mechanic is fellowship, and I think that's beautiful.
Yeah.
You're welcome back anytime. If you'd like, you can say who you are, where they can find you again. I'll drop a few of the links. I think most of them are there already, but
Well, once again, thank you so much for having me. It was so much fun, and I love talking about all these things. And it's really nice when people bring up stuff from so long ago. I love talking about Virgins and Vixens. It's still like one of the closest projects to my heart, and it's like it never gets attention, but maybe on the re-release. Again, I'm Kimi Hughes. I'm the owner of Golden Lasso Games, and I also own and run the Happy Jacks RPG Network. And my game Starscape is kickstarting, like we said, in a couple days. So if you're interested in found family sci-fi stories, games that are about relationships and the heart and all that, as much, and more than like hit points, then check it out. You can go to goldenlassogames.com/Kickstarter. It'll take you to the Kickstarter page right now. You can follow it. We actually have some rewards for follow numbers. So I'm releasing different pre-gens of different crews, and we're at before we started the interview, we were at about 558 or something. If we reach 600, then I'll also be releasing pre-gens of the Battlestar Galactica crew and Battlestar and the Galactica as part of pre-gens that you can use to play Starscape. So far, we've gotten Star Trek Next Generation, Firefly, and Farscape. So,
which I have never seen that mechanic in a Kickstarter. Collecting emails. I thought, oh, that's really cool. You already are seeing rewards. All right. Well, I'm Scott, and this has been Story Talk. I hope that the picture told a story that was interesting, exciting, and leads you to more and better tabletop role-playing game experiences. Have a good night, and we'll see you soon. Bye, everybody.